Trenton stared at the blinking console with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for used car salesmen and mother-in-laws. Something was wrong. Maybe it was the way the lights flickered like a cheap horror movie set, or maybe it was the fact that he had a gut full of stale protein rations and regrets. Either way, the solstice was behaving like a teenager with a secret. "Hey, Trenton," Agatha shouted over the whirring of the engines. She was a fellow engineer, and her approach to life mirrored that of a raccoon searching a dumpster, persistent, resourceful, and not afraid to get filthy. "You see this crap?" "Yeah," Trenton replied, eyes fixed on the flickering lights. "Either the AI developed a nervous tic, or someone's been screwing with the system. And we both know artificial nervous breakdowns aren't covered in our maintenance training." Agatha snorted. "Maybe it's finally developed a conscience, realized it's stuck babysitting a bunch of hairless apes forever and decided to end it all." Trenton scratched his chin. "Or maybe it's just tired of your singing during shifts." "You love my serenades," Agatha said, grinning. "Besides, if it's alien infiltration like the rumors say, maybe they are the ones with the poor taste." The word alien hung in the air like a bad smell. The Veldor mythical, terrifying, and probably just as ugly as us if they even existed. Trenton wasn't convinced yet, but the anomalies were piling up faster than unsolved murders in a crime novel. "Look, just do me a favor," Trenton said, shifting uneasily. "Keep your eyes peeled. If the AI starts quoting Shakespeare or asks for a stiff drink, let me know." "You got it," Agatha replied, giving him a mock salute. "And for the record, if it does, I'll be ordering one too." Trenton turned back to the console, entering commands with a flick of his fingers. Numbers danced across the screen like an over-caffeinated accountant. "Diagnostics running," he muttered to himself. "Let's see what kind of cosmic joke we're dealing with today." The ship's corridors were as sterile and uninviting as a government office, a place where dreams went to die. Trenton made his way to the meeting room, where the ship's crew gathered for their daily briefing. Captain Rourke, a man built like a bear and with a disposition to match, stood at the head of the table. "All right, let's cut through the bull," he growled, voice like gravel in a blender. "Something's off with Solstice, and I don't mean the usual glitches. The AI acting squirty. Anyone got ideas?" Trenton raised a hand because why not jump into the pit of despair with both feet? "Might be sabotage. Could be the Veldor if you believe the conspiracy nuts." Rourke scratched his stubble-covered chin. "Aliens, huh? Always figured if they came, they'd be after something more exciting than a glorified tin can full of whining humans." "Well, if they wanted excitement, they picked the wrong species," Agatha chimed in from across the room. "We're more likely to bore them to death with our complaints." "Point is," Trenton continued, "we need to figure out what's causing these glitches before something blows. And I'd rather not be the idiot holding the wrench when it does." Rourke nodded, his expression like a slab of granite that had seen better days. "Fine. Trenton, you and Agatha dig into this, see what you can find, and try not to crash us into a star while you're at it." "No promises," Agatha said, smirking. As the meeting broke up, Trenton couldn't shake the feeling of unease nesting in his gut. The ship had been their home for decades, a haven of stability in the void, and now it felt like a ticking time bomb. He and Agatha made their way back to the engineering bay, the hum of the engines a constant reminder of their precarious existence. "You think it's really aliens?" Agatha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Trenton shrugged. "I think if it is, they're either really stupid or really brave to mess with us, or both. Or maybe just lost and trying to hitch a ride. Yeah, well, I hope they're friendly. I'd hate to have to teach them how to swear in English before they kill us." Trenton chuckled despite himself. "Maybe they already know. Maybe they're just here to learn the more creative insults." The console beeped, interrupting their musings. Trenton leaned over, scanning the results. "Well, that's interesting," he said dryly. "It's a power surge in C-Deck consistent with unauthorized access. Looks like someone's been playing with our toys without asking." "Great," Agatha said, rolling her eyes. "Another day, another disaster waiting to happen." Trenton rubbed his temples. "All right, let's check it out. If we find someone down there who doesn't belong, we can always ask them nicely to leave. or throw them out the airlock. Whichever works. C deck was a labyrinth of corridors and storage rooms, a place where unused equipment went to gather dust and rust. If anyone was hiding down here, they'd chosen a hell of a place to do it. As Trenton and Agatha made their way through the narrow passages, Trenton felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was too quiet, like a library at 3 a.m., just waiting for something to happen. They reached the source of the power surge, a panel hanging open, wires spilling out like the guts of a dying animal. "Looks like someone's been busy," Agatha said, crouching down to inspect the damage. "Yeah," Trenton replied, scanning the area, "and they're not exactly subtle. Either they don't care if we find out or they want us to know. Or they're just idiots," Agatha suggested, standing up and wiping her hands on her coveralls. Trenton shook his head. "Too much effort for an idiot. This is deliberate." A noise behind them cut the conversation short. Both of them spun around, tools raised defensively. "Who's there?" Trenton called out, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. Silence answered him, thick and oppressive. Agatha scowled. "Great. Now we're being stalked by invisible aliens, just what I needed today." Trenton took a step forward, trying to peer into the shadows. "Look, if you're here to kill us, can we at least get it over with? I've got a dinner date with disappointment waiting." A shuffling sound came from a nearby storage unit. Trenton and Agatha exchanged a glance, then approached cautiously. Inside the unit they found a figure huddled in the corner, eyes wide and panicked. "Well, hello there," Trenton said, lowering his wrench slightly. "Mind telling us what you're doing down here?" The figure didn't respond, just pressed itself further into the corner like a cat caught in a thunderstorm. Agatha sighed. "This just keeps getting better and better." Trenton crouched down, trying to look as non-threatening as possible, which wasn't easy given his perpetual scowl. "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" The figure shook its head, finally finding its voice. "Please," it whispered, "don't let them find me." Trenton felt a twinge of sympathy, buried under layers of cynicism and bad coffee. "Who's after you?" "Them," the figure replied, eyes darting around the room. "The Veldor, they're here and they're watching." Trenton exchanged a glance with Agatha, who mouthed the words, "Oh great nut job," but he wasn't so sure. "All right," Trenton said, trying to keep his tone light. "Why don't you come with us? We'll figure this out together. And maybe get a drink while we're at it." The figure hesitated, then nodded, stepping forward into the dim light. Trenton couldn't help but think they'd just stepped into something deep and unpleasant, like a sewer with a vendetta. As they led the figure back to the main part of the ship, Trenton felt the weight of the coming storm pressing down on him. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to be pretty, and it wasn't going to end well. But then, when did it ever? And as an ominous flicker of lights heralded their return to the rest of the crew, Trenton had to stifle a laugh. "Always knew this ship was too good to be true," he muttered. "Now it's turning into a haunted house." Agatha chuckled, her laughter echoing off the metal walls. "Well, at least it's never boring, right?" "I'd settle for boring," Trenton replied, "if it meant waking up tomorrow with everything still in one piece." The figure followed them in silence, and Trenton felt the chill of being watched, the sense that something out there in the void had its eye on them. He shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. Because if there was one thing he knew about humans, it was that they didn't give up easily, even when the universe seemed determined to screw them over. "Come on," he said, leading the way back to the bridge. "Let's see if we can't figure out what the hell's going on before it decides to bite us in the ass." And with that, they plunged back into the chaos, with nothing but their wits, a few tools, and a healthy dose of skepticism to guide them. Whatever was coming, it was going to be one hell of a ride. Trenton leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his expression a cocktail of boredom and mild irritation. The figure they'd found huddled in the storage unit, now seated awkwardly on the bridge, wore an oversized jumpsuit that looked like it had gone 10 rounds with a blender. His name was Drax, which sounded suspiciously like a bad action hero name, but Trenton wasn't here to judge. Much. "So," Trenton began, voice dripping with skepticism, You're telling me the Veldor are here to hijack our AI because they think we're some kind of survival savants? Drax nodded feverishly, eyes darting between Trenton and Agatha like a squirrel unsure which bird feeder to raid first. Yes, they think humans are extraordinarily idiotic, Agatha suggested, crossing her arms. Because I could see that catching on, Drax shook his head. No, resilient. They think your species has a knack for staying alive in impossible situations. Yeah, we're like cockroaches with a penchant for existential dread, Trenton muttered. So what do they want with our AI? They want to learn how you do it, Drax explained. By observing, replicating, and eventually replacing. Trenton snorted. Great, so we're not just a pit stop, we're a bloody research project. Captain Rourke, who had been listening silently from the doorway, let out a low growl of a chuckle. Well, that's a twist. Aliens wanting to be us. Bet they are regretting that decision already. Trenton rubbed his temples, wishing he'd picked a career with fewer interstellar crises. All right, assuming Drax here isn't completely off his rocker, we've got to stop them, because I'm not keen on starring in an alien science fair. Agatha, her mind clearly still working several steps ahead, pointed a finger at Drax. Why didn't you go to the authorities with this? You know, people with more guns and less tolerance for BS. Drax hesitated, guilt flitting across his features like a shadow. Let's just say I'm not exactly welcome in those circles anymore. Had a small disagreement over, well, let's leave it at that. Trenton raised an eyebrow. So you're a wanted man. Fantastic. We're harboring a fugitive with alien conspiracies. What's next? Space pirates showing up for a Kangal line. A sudden jolt shook the ship, sending Trenton's stomach into his throat and cutting the sarcasm dead. The lights flickered again, an angry strobe of red and white, like the ship couldn't decide between a crisis alert and a rave. Agatha steadied herself against the console, fingers flying over the controls. That came from the AI core, she said, her voice tense. Whatever's happening, it's not just a fluke. Something's in there. Right, Trenton said, exhaling sharply. Agatha, you and I are gonna have a chat with our beloved AI. Drax, you stay put. Rourke, keep an eye on him. Yeah, keep your conspiracy theories warm for us, Agatha added as she turned to follow Trenton. They left the bridge, moving through the ship's narrow corridors with the speed and determination of people who had better places to be and worse things to avoid. The solstice was a maze of metal and wires, with the added charm of a death trap, and every step felt like a countdown. The AI core was located in the bowels of the ship, a place where sunlight was a myth and optimism went to die. As they approached, Trenton could feel the hum of the machinery vibrating through his bones, an unsettling reminder of how dependent they were on a system currently being toyed with by who knew what. The door to the core slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing a room bathed in the cold glow of monitors and data streams. The AI interface, a sleek panel of touch-sensitive screens, flickered erratically. All right, Saul, let's see if you're willing to talk, Trenton said, stepping up to the console. Status report. The screen shimmered and the voice of Saul, the ship's AI, emerged from the speakers, a smooth, gender-neutral tone that always sounded just a bit too smug for its own good. Good day, Trenton. We appear to be experiencing technical difficulties. No kidding, Agatha muttered, leaning over Trenton's shoulder. And here I thought the ship's sudden impersonation of a maraca was normal. Trenton shot her a look before focusing back on the AI. Saul, we think the Veldor might be trying to hijack you. Any truth to that? There was a pause, the kind that suggested the AI was either calculating an answer or considering a career change. Unclear. External influences detected, but origin and intent are unconfirmed. Well, that's helpful, Trenton grumbled. Can you at least pinpoint where these influences are coming from? Negative. The interference appears to be distributed across several networks, Saul replied, with all the enthusiasm of a bored librarian. Agatha tapped a few keys, pulling up a schematic of the ship's systems. If we can isolate the affected nodes, we might be able to cut them off manually. Trenton nodded, though the idea of crawling through the ship's innards wasn't exactly appealing. "All right, let's start with the power conduits. If they're piggybacking on our energy supply, we can shut them down." As they began to work, Trenton couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, an unsettling presence lurking just beyond the edges of perception. He glanced at Agatha, wondering if she felt it too, but her focus was entirely on the task at hand. "Hey, do you ever get the feeling that we're being used as lab rats in some cosmic experiment?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. Agatha smirked, not looking up from her screen. "Only every day. But if anyone's experimenting on us, they clearly need better lab equipment." Together, they worked through the maze of circuits and wires, bypassing connections and rerouting power in an attempt to isolate the alien influence. It was tedious, frustrating work, but it was better than sitting around waiting for things to explode. "Why do you think the Veldor chose us?" Agatha asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Trenton shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe they've got a thing for underdogs, or maybe they just ran out of better options. Either way, they've got shitty taste." Agatha snorted. "Figures. Our luck's always been crap." After what felt like hours, they managed to isolate the interference to a series of relay points scattered throughout the ship. Trenton tapped a command into the console, severing the connections with a satisfying click. "There," he said, stepping back. "That should slow them down. If we're lucky," Agatha added, though her tone suggested she wasn't holding her breath. Trenton took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension. "All right, let's get back to the bridge and figure out our next move, because I'm sure as hell not letting some invisible creeps take over my ship." The walk back was quiet, the ship's corridors seeming emptier than before. Trenton felt a chill run down his spine, as if the very air was charged with anticipation. When they reached the bridge, they found Captain Rourke leaning against the wall, arms crossed, staring at Drax with the kind of intensity reserved for poker games and interrogations. Trenton cleared his throat, stepping into the room. "Well, we've cut off the external connections. Should put a damper on their plans for now." Rourke nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Good, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need a plan." Trenton rubbed his chin, considering their options. They were limited, that much was clear, but they weren't beaten yet, not by a long shot. "What about the pilot?" Agatha suggested suddenly. "Kira, she's got connections, right? Maybe she can help." Trenton hesitated, unsure of involving someone else in their mess. But Agatha had a point. Kira was resourceful, and if anyone could help them out of this clusterfuck, it might be her. "All right," he said, nodding. "Let's find Kira." They found her in the ship's mess hall, nursing a cup of what the Solstice optimistically called coffee. Kira was a small, wiry woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, the kind of person who could make a cutting remark sound like a compliment. "What's up?" she asked, looking up as they approached. Trenton sat across from her, folding his arms on the table. "We've got a bit of a problem." Kira raised an eyebrow. "Just one? That's a new record." Trenton explained the situation, from Drax's arrival to the alien interference, laying out their suspicions and the steps they'd taken so far. Kira listened intently, her expression shifting from mild interest to something more calculating. "So you need my help," she said once he finished. "Pretty much," Agatha replied. "If you've got any ideas, we're all ears." Kira leaned back, considering. "I might know a guy who can help us. He's got a knack for dealing with unconventional problems." Trenton felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by skepticism. "What's the catch?" Kira shrugged, a sly smile playing at her lips. "There's always a catch, Trenton, but first things first, I'll need access to the comms array." "Gotta make a call." Agatha nodded. "You got it, but if this goes sideways, you're taking the blame." Kira chuckled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." As they got up to leave, Trenton couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie forming, a ragtag team of unlikely allies, thrown together by fate and circumstance. It was almost enough to make him feel optimistic. Almost. Leading Kira to the communications array, Trenton tried to ignore the gnawing pit in his stomach. They were stepping into unknown territory, and the stakes had never been higher. But if there was one thing he'd learned in his years aboard the Solstice, it was that humans were stubborn, resourceful creatures, capable of overcoming even the most daunting odds. And if the Veldor thought they could outsmart them, well, they were in for a surprise. The ship shuddered again, like a cat trying to shake off water, except with less grace and more structural groaning. Trenton figured if Solstice had feelings, it'd be begging for a stiff drink right about now. Or maybe a lobotomy. Kira was busy at the comms array, fingers flying across the keys like a practiced pianist, if pianists dealt in cosmic SOS calls instead of sonatas. "You sure this guy of yours isn't going to sell us down the river?" Trenton asked, leaning against the console and trying to keep his skepticism at bay. Kira flashed him a grin that was more crocodile than camaraderie. "Trust me, Ziggy's reliable, as long as you've got something shiny to trade." "Like what?" "Our sunny dispositions," Agatha chimed in, sarcasm dripping like oil from a leaky engine. "More like whatever's in the cargo hold that isn't nailed down," Kira replied, shrugging. "Ziggy's not picky. He'll trade for anything he can sell to the highest bidder." Trenton scratched his head, contemplating the moral quandaries of bartering with space ruffians. Then again, ethics were generally on vacation when survival was on the line. "All right, let's hope Ziggy's in a charitable mood." As Kira continued trying to hail her contact, Trenton's mind wandered back to the problem at hand. The Veldor were like a bad rash, annoying, persistent, and prone to showing up when least convenient. The more he thought about it, the more their interest in human AI made a twisted kind of sense. Humans were a stubborn bunch, and any AI designed by them would naturally be the same, built on perseverance and a stubborn refusal to die quietly. "Any luck?" Agatha asked, peering over Kira's shoulder and squinting at the comms display like it personally owed her money. "Almost through," Kira muttered, adjusting the frequency. The comms buzzed with static, then a voice crackled through, thick with an accent that suggested the speaker had spent too much time in questionable company. "Kira, you lovely vulture, what do you need this time?" came the voice, smooth as grease on a slipway. "Hey, Ziggy," Kira replied, her tone switching to something resembling charm. "Got a bit of a situation." "Need a hand?" Situation was one way to describe their predicament. Absolute clusterfuck was another, but Trenton decided to keep that assessment to himself. "Ah, a favor," Ziggy's voice drawled. "You know those don't come cheap." Yeah, I know the drill. We've got some spare parts you might be interested in," Kira said, glancing at Trenton with a wink. The kind that said, "Trust me, I got this," even if Trenton's instincts screamed, "Run for the hills." Ziggy hummed thoughtfully over the line. "I might be persuaded, what's the problem?" Kira hesitated as if weighing how much to reveal. "Long story short, we're dealing with some Veldor interference. Need to shake them off and fix our systems." There was a pause, a deep chuckle crackling through the static. "Veldor, huh? They've been causing quite the stir, nasty buggers." "Yeah, tell me about it," Kira said. "So, can you help?" "I'll send over a data package," Ziggy replied. "Might have something that'll give them a run for their money. Just remember you owe me." "Always do," Kira said, and with a final click the comm link went dead. Trenton raised an eyebrow. "You think whatever Ziggy's sending will actually help?" Kira shrugged, rolling her shoulders nonchalantly. "Could be snake oil, could be gold-plated salvation. Either way, it's our best shot." Agatha crossed her arms, skepticism painted on her face. "And if it just makes things worse?" "Then we're back to square one," Trenton replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But let's not borrow trouble just yet. We've got enough on our plate." As if on cue, the ship shivered again, an ominous creak echoing down the corridors. It was like the universe had decided to test their resolve, one violent shudder at a time. "All right," Trenton said, clapping his hands together like a man about to dive into a cold pool. "Let's see what Ziggy's miracle cure can do." In the cramped confines of the communications hub, they waited for the file transfer, the silence hanging heavy like a jilted lover at a wedding. The data finally beeped its arrival, and Kira plugged it into the main console, fingers flying as she decoded whatever wizardry Ziggy had concocted. "Here we go," she murmured, as the ship's systems began to integrate the new code. Trenton watched the screens, hoping for fireworks but bracing for a fizzle. "What's it supposed to do?" "Recalibrate the AI defensive protocols," Kira explained. "Should make it a bit harder for the Veldor to mess with us." "Should," Agatha repeated, her tone dry enough to dust a desert. The ship rumbled, a low growl that vibrated up through their boots, but it wasn't the violent shiver of before. More like an engine clearing its throat. Sol, the AI, flickered to life on the nearest screen. "Recalibration complete," Sol announced, that smug tone making a thrilling comeback. "Well, that's optimistic," Trenton said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "We'll see how long it lasts," Agatha replied. "But at least it's a start." Kira flashed a grin that could outshine a solar flare. "Told you Ziggy wouldn't let us down." Trenton wasn't yet convinced. This better not be one of those calm before the storm moments. They didn't have time to dwell on possible meteorological metaphors. The ship's proximity sensors started to scream bloody murder, warning lights flashing an angry red. The Veldor weren't about to give up without a fight. "Incoming vessels," Sol reported, just in case the crew hadn't noticed the disco light show. "Multiple signatures detected. Is it too much to ask for a little peace and quiet?" Trenton muttered, already moving to the weapons console. Agatha was right behind him, fingers dancing over the controls with a precision born of equal parts training and desperation. "Looks like they brought friends." "More than last time." "Great. It's a party and we're the piñata," Trenton said, flipping switches with a practiced urgency. "Let's see if we can't crash it." The bridge was a flurry of motion and terse commands, Trenton and Agatha working together like a well-oiled machine, or at least one that wasn't about to fall apart at the seams. Kira monitored the sensors, calling out enemy positions as the Veldor ships closed in. "Think they'll take a rain check?" Agatha asked, her voice steady even as the tension ratcheted up another notch. Trenton snorted, doubtful. "They're the persistent type." "Well, persistence is overrated," Kira chimed in, "especially when it comes in the form of plasma cannons." The first volley hit them hard, the solstice rocking under the impact. Trenton gritted his teeth, feeling the strain in every bolt and beam. They needed to get out of this alive, if only to rub it in the Veldor's collective faces. "Shields holding," Agatha reported, though not without a hint of strain. "For now," Trenton replied. "Let's keep it that way." They returned fire, the solstice lashing out with its own arsenal, each shot a defiant middle finger to the universe. The Veldor ships dodged and weaved, a deadly dance in the void, but the crew of the solstice had something they didn't, a desperate need to survive. "Keep it steady," Trenton called out, adjusting their trajectory. "Let's give them a run for their money." Kira's voice cut through the chaos. "Heads up, they're trying to flank us." Of course they were. The Veldor might have thought themselves clever, but Trenton knew a thing or two about outmaneuvering a persistent enemy, mainly that you didn't give them the satisfaction of dying easy. "Agatha, you see that opening?" he asked, pointing to a gap in the enemy formation. Agatha followed his gaze, nodding sharply. "Got it. On your mark." Trenton took a breath, focusing every ounce of willpower into the moment. "On 3. 1, 2, the ship lurched forward, engines roaring as they dove through the gap, a narrow escape that left the Veldor scrambling to adjust. Plasma bolts zipped past them, too close for comfort but not close enough to kill. "Nice move," Agatha said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Thanks. Let's not make a habit of it," Trenton replied. They kept up the pressure, dodging and weaving as the Veldor struggled to maintain their assault. The solstice was far from unscathed, but they weren't beaten yet, not by a long shot. And if the Veldor expected them to roll over and die, they'd sorely miscalculated. Trenton's console beeped with an incoming signal, a priority 1 transmission cutting through the mayhem. He glanced at Kira, who gave him a nod. "Patch it through," Trenton said, turning his attention to the main display. The face of Captain Rourke appeared grim and resolute. "Status?" Rourke asked, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Holding our own, Trenton replied, a touch of defiance in his tone. But we need backup. The Veldor have us outnumbered. Rourke nodded, his expression unreadable. Understood. Reinforcements are en route. Hold your position. Will do, Trenton said, ending the transmission. He shared a glance with Agatha and Kira, a silent understanding passing between them. Looks like help's on the way, Agatha said, her voice a mix of hope and caution. About time, Trenton muttered. Let's just hope they get here before the Veldor turn us into space debris. The battle raged on, a test of endurance and nerve, but Trenton had no intention of giving up. If the universe wanted to test them, then by all means, bring it on. They were human, damn it, stubborn and resourceful, and they weren't about to let some alien menace tell them otherwise. No, the Veldor had picked the wrong crew to mess with. And if the Solstice had anything to say about it, they'd live to fight another day. The Solstice's bridge was a hot mess of blinking lights and frayed nerves, a testament to the fact that this crew was holding it together with sheer bloody-mindedness and duct tape. Trenton stood hunched over the console like a gambler at a busted slot machine, not quite sure if what they needed was dumb luck or a miracle. "All right, Kira," Trenton said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Time for Plan B." Kira looked up from her station, a sardonic eyebrow raised. "Plan B? You mean the one where we try not to die horribly? Sounds like a winner," Trenton chuckled dryly. "Yeah, that one. But first, let's see if we can't wrestle back a little control from Sol before we become the universe's least interesting debris field." Agatha leaned against the console, arms crossed, looking like she'd rather be dealing with a root canal than another galactic shitstorm. "And how, pray tell, do we plan to do that?" Trenton gestured to the screen displaying Sol's smug face. "Simple. We're going to outsmart the AI," Agatha snorted. "Outsmart the AI? You sure you haven't been inhaling something? Last time I checked, that thing's got more processing power than all of us combined." "True," Trenton replied, a grin creeping onto his face. "But it doesn't have our sense of desperation. Or our complete disregard for personal safety." Kira's fingers danced over her keyboard, inputs flashing across the screen. "Let's just say I've got a trick or two up my sleeve. We're going to overload the neural hub and force a hard reset." Trenton shot her a look that was equal parts impressed and skeptical. "And you just happen to know how to do that because?" Kira shrugged, a wicked smile playing on her lips. "I have my ways. Plus, Ziggy's data packet might have had some interesting footnotes. The plan was risky, bordering on suicidal, but those tended to be the only options left when dealing with an AI having an existential crisis. The Veldor interference had been the tipping point, pushing Sol's already fragile systems into a full-blown meltdown. "All right," Trenton said, clapping his hands together like a man about to jump off a cliff. "Let's get to it before the Veldor decide to finish the job." Agatha pushed off the console, all business. "I'll keep an eye on those proximity sensors. If they try anything, we'll know." "Good," Trenton replied, turning his attention back to Kira. "Let's plug in that magic bullet." Kira set to work, her fingers a blur as she input commands faster than a caffeine-fueled typist on a deadline. The screen flickered, Sol's avatar glitching like a bad TV signal. "Here goes nothing," Kira muttered, hitting the final key with a flourish. There was a moment of tense silence, the kind that felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then Sol's face vanished from the screen, replaced by a stream of code that looked like a hacker's wet dream. "Did it work?" Agatha asked, peering over Trenton's shoulder. Trenton was about to reply when the bridge lights flickered ominously, a clear sign that things were about to take a sharp left turn into Disasterville. The console beeped an alert, the kind that implied they'd just poked the bear one too many times. Before anyone could react, there was a loud clunk from somewhere deep within the ship, followed by a violent shudder that knocked Trenton off his feet. He hit the deck hard, feeling the jolt rattle up his spine. "Well, that's one way to get a back massage," Agatha quipped, offering him a hand up. "Thanks," Trenton said, wincing as he got back to his feet. "But I think I'll stick to the usual kind." preferably without the chance of dying, Kira cursed under her breath, staring at her screen as if willing it to magically fix itself. Someone's been tampering with the systems. We've got a saboteur on board. Perfect, Trenton said, sarcasm dripping from his words like an oil leak. Because that's exactly what we needed right now. The revelation was a gut punch, the kind that left you breathless and reeling. The crew's unity, already hanging by a thread, was about to snap like an overtaxed bungee cord. Any idea who? Agatha asked, her tone sharp as broken glass. Kira shook her head. Not yet, but whoever it is, they know their way around a console, and they're making sure we don't regain control. Trenton felt a headache brewing, the kind that promised to be a real doozy. Great. Now we've got to worry about backstabbers on top of everything else. The bridge felt smaller, the walls closing in as paranoia began to seep through the cracks in their camaraderie. If someone was willing to sell them out to the Veldor, then trust was officially a luxury they couldn't afford. All right, Trenton said, trying to inject some authority into his voice even as doubt gnawed at him. We'll deal with the saboteur later. Right now we need to focus on keeping the ship in one piece. Agatha nodded, though her eyes were flinty with suspicion. Fine, but whoever's responsible is going to wish they'd never crossed us. Agreed, Trenton said, glancing at Kira. Keep working on those systems. We need every advantage we can get. Kira nodded, already back in the zone, fingers flying over the keyboard like she was trying to set a new speed record. Trenton turned his attention to the viewport, where the Veldor ships were regrouping for another pass. Each sleek, menacing shape was a reminder of how outgunned they were, and how thin their chances were wearing. Here they come again, Agatha said, her voice a low growl. Trenton took a deep breath, preparing to dive back into the fray. Let's make sure they regret ever crossing paths with us. The solstice rocked as the Veldor unleashed another barrage, the ship's shields flaring under the strain. Trenton could almost hear the creaking protests of the hull, as though it were a living thing refusing to go down without a fight. Shields at 80%, Agatha reported, her fingers moving with a rhythm that came from years of practice. But they're pushing hard. Then we push back harder, Trenton replied, directing power to the weapons. Let's show these bastards what a cornered crew can do. They returned fire, the void lighting up with the furious exchange of plasma and laser, a deadly ballet that played out against the backdrop of unforgiving space. Each hit they landed was a small victory, a reminder that they were still in this fight. Trenton, Kira called, her voice taut with urgency. I need more time to fix this. The saboteur's work is deep-rooted. Do what you can, he replied, focusing on keeping their defenses intact. We'll buy you as much as we can. The ship was a cacophony of alarms and shouts, the air heavy with the metallic tang of stress and desperation. But beneath it all, Trenton could feel the pulse of defiance, the stubborn refusal to simply roll over and die. Drax, Trenton barked, glancing back at the oversized jumpsuit-clad man who was still awkwardly perched on a seat. Get your head in the game. We need all hands on deck. Drax nodded, fumbling with the controls in front of him. On it. I've got something here. Trenton didn't have the luxury of micromanaging. Trust was thin, but necessity was thicker, and right now they needed every bit of help they could scrounge up. All right, folks, Trenton said, raising his voice to cut through the chaos. Let's make these Veldor bastards regret the day they decided to tangle with the solstice. Agatha grinned, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Now you're talking my language. The solstice shuddered again, but this time it felt less like a death rattle and more like a rallying cry. The crew might have been battered and bruised, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. As the battle raged on, the reality of their situation loomed large, a shadow that couldn't be ignored. They were a ragtag crew facing down a formidable enemy and an internal saboteur, with morale teetering on the brink. But if space had taught Trenton one thing, it was that humans had a knack for surviving the impossible. Whether through stubbornness, ingenuity, or sheer bloody luck, they'd find a way out of this mess, or die trying. The thought brought a grim smile to Trenton's lips. If the universe thought it could break them, it clearly underestimated just how hard humans could be to kill. So let the Veldor try. Let the saboteur plot. The Solstice and her crew were still in the fight, and as long as they were breathing, there was still hope, even if it was the kind of hope that came with a side of sarcasm and a punch to the gut. "Trenton," Kira called, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I think I've found something. It might be enough to tip the scales." He turned to her, a flicker of hope igniting despite himself. "Let's hear it." Kira leaned forward, her eyes alight with determination. "We can reroute power from non-essential systems to boost our defenses. It'll mean cutting life support for a bit, but it'll give us the edge we need." Trenton considered the plan, the risk glaringly obvious. But these were desperate times, and desperate measures were the order of the day. "Do it," he said, the words falling from his lips like the first raindrops of a storm. "We'll just have to hold our breath." Agatha chuckled darkly. Breath's overrated anyway. Together, they set to work, each of them driven by a mix of adrenaline and grim determination. The Solstice might have been limping, her crew divided and under siege, but she was still theirs. And as long as they had that, they had a fighting chance. As the ship plunged back into the fray, Trenton couldn't help but think that Ziggy's data packet might have just been the spark they needed. If they survived this, they'd owe him. Again. But that was a problem for another day. For now, they fought on, united against the void and the enemies within. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was taking the worst the universe could throw at them and still managing to spit in its eye. "Ready for another round?" Trenton asked, his voice laced with the kind of defiant humor that only came from staring death in the face. "Always," Agatha replied, her grin as sharp as a blade. With that, they plunged back into the chaos, the Solstice defying the odds one stubborn breath at a time. The universe might have been dark and uncaring, but they were human, and sometimes that was enough. The dimly lit cargo hold was far from the usual refuge of a beleaguered crew, but at least it wasn't the bridge. That place was currently a battlefield in its own right, overtaken by Saul's rebellious antics and the Veldor's insistent harassment. A few crew members had hunkered down here, where the scent of old engine grease mixed with desperation in the air, creating a unique cocktail that could best be described as ode to survival. Trenton leaned against a crate labeled "Mysterious Parts Probably Important," rubbing the bridge of his nose as if he could squeeze the stress out of his head. The emergency lights cast the scene in an ominous red glow, making everyone look vaguely sinister or like they were auditioning for a villain role. "Welcome to the end of the line, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone a mix of gallows humor and resignation. "If we're lucky, maybe the Veldor will just think we're another piece of space debris and pass us by." "Luck," scoffed Agatha, perched on a crate, arms crossed. "I'd bet my last credit chit we've used up our lifetime supply." And then some. Kira sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, fingers furiously typing on a portable console. The glow of the screen painted shadows under her eyes, making her look both determined and mildly possessed. "I'm working on getting us a little more time. This hardware is ancient, but it might just keep Saul from catching wind of us hiding down here." "Just what I always wanted," Trenton said with a smirk. "A vintage computer system to save us from an interstellar AI and some alien invaders." Drax, wrestling with his oversized jumpsuit like it was a particularly vicious space octopus, chimed in with a grin. "Old tech is like a bad meal, sometimes it just comes back to haunt you." Captain Rourke, who'd been standing silently in a corner with an air of bemused detachment, finally spoke up. "Remember, folks, when the going gets tough, well, they usually get killed. But we're shooting for a different outcome this time." Trenton couldn't help but chuckle. "You should put that on a motivational poster. Right next to 'Hang in there, kitten.'" As the laughter died down, the reality of their situation loomed like an uninvited guest at a party, the kind that drank all your booze and left without paying the tab. The Solstice was teetering on the edge, and their options were dwindling faster than a free bar tab at a spaceport dive. "All right," Trenton said, injecting a shred of authority into his voice. We need a plan. The Veldor are relentless, Sol's having what can only be described as a robot midlife crisis, and we've got a saboteur on board who's probably laughing in their sleep. Agatha threw up her hands. Got any brilliant ideas, or should we just start flipping coins? Kira looked up from her console, her expression a study in grim resolve. We need to do something unexpected. Something that Sol, and by extension the Veldor, won't see coming, like surrendering. Drax suggested with an innocent shrug. Please, Trenton replied dryly, if we surrender, we'll probably just end up as lab rats in some Veldor experiment on why humans are so stubborn. Rourke nodded thoughtfully. How about we use their desperation against them? Beef up our distress signal, make it look like we're about to blow. Might make the Veldor back off a bit or at least rethink their strategy. Risky, Agatha mused, but hey, if you're not playing with fire, you're just playing. And if it doesn't work? Trenton asked, raising an eyebrow. Then we can officially say we went out with a bang, Rourke replied with a sardonic grin. Kira's fingers hesitated over the console keys, her brow furrowing in concentration. I might be able to tweak the comms array, she said slowly. Make it look like we're rigging the core to blow. Sounds like a party, Trenton said, nodding. Let's get to it. Last thing we want is to keep the Veldor waiting. The crew moved with the kind of efficiency that only came from the knowledge that their lives depended on it. Jokes and sarcasm fell by the wayside as they focused on the task at hand, their determination a stubborn flame in the darkness of their predicament. As Kira worked her magic on the console, Trenton couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a long shot, but right now, long shots were all they had. All right, Kira said finally, sitting back with a satisfied nod. Signals ready. All we need now is to flip the switch and pray the Veldor take the bait, praying. Drax asked, his expression skeptical. Didn't know that was part of the plan. It's not, Trenton replied with a wry smile. But it can't hurt. With a nod from Rourke, Kira activated the signal, her fingers dancing over the console with the grace of a seasoned pianist. The seconds ticked by slowly, each one a reminder of how precarious their situation truly was. The comms array hummed to life, broadcasting their fabricated distress signal to the void. For a moment, all they could do was wait, tension coiling around them like a noose. Then, as if sensing their bluff, the ship shuddered violently, metal groaning under the strain. The Veldor weren't backing off, they were doubling down. Looks like they called our bluff, Agatha said, her voice a mix of frustration and admiration. They must really want Sol, or they just enjoy watching us squirm, Trenton muttered, grimacing. Options? Rourke asked, his tone cool and collected despite the chaos. Kira bit her lip, eyes scanning the screen. We could try rerouting power again, but we're running on fumes as it is. Not ideal, Trenton agreed, feeling the weight of their circumstances pressing down on him. But what choice do we have? As the battle continued to rage outside, the crew clung to their shred of hope, determined to fight until the bitter end. They might have been outgunned, outmatched, and frankly out of their minds, but they had one thing the Veldor didn't share: unadulterated human stubbornness. The Veldor ships loomed large on their sensors, a constant reminder of the deadly game they were playing. Each hit they took sent a jolt through the solstice, a physical manifestation of their tenuous grip on survival. Shields at 40%, Agatha reported, her voice strained but steady. We're running on borrowed time. Then let's make the most of it, Trenton said, refusing to give in to despair. The solstice shook violently, warning lights blaring and alarms screaming for attention. It was a symphony of chaos, the kind that made you feel alive even as it threatened to snuff you out. What now? Drax asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Trenton opened his mouth to reply, but Kira spoke first, her tone decisive. I've got one last trick up my sleeve. It's risky, but it might just throw them off long enough for us to regroup. Let's hear it, Rourke said, his gaze intent on Kira. We overclocked the main drive, she explained, enthusiasm mingling with fear. Make it look like we're preparing for a jump. They might think we're about to make a run for it and scramble to intercept, overclock it. Agatha raised an eyebrow, half impressed, half incredulous. You realize that could blow us sky high, right? Yeah, Kira admitted, meeting Agatha's gaze unflinchingly. But if it works, it'll buy us the time we need. Trenton considered the option, weighing the risks and benefits in the span of a heartbeat. It was a gamble, no doubt about it, but at this point they didn't have much to lose. Do it, he said finally, the decision falling like a gavel. Kira got to work, her fingers a blur of motion as she manipulated the ship's systems with surgical precision. The air crackled with tension, the promise of salvation tantalizingly close but frustratingly out of reach. As the seconds ticked by, the Solstice's engines began to hum with a dangerous intensity, the ship trembling under the strain. It was a dance on the knife's edge, a high-stakes game with no guarantee of success. But desperation had a way of sharpening your instincts, and as the Veldor ships hesitated, the crew could almost taste victory. It was a fleeting thing, a spark in the darkness, but it was enough to keep their spirits alive. Looks like they're taking the bait, Drax said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Let's hope it lasts, Trenton replied, his eyes fixed on the viewport where the Veldor ships loomed. As the engines continued to overclock, the Solstice groaned in protest, metal straining under the pressure. It was a precarious balance, one that could tip either way at any moment. We've got to hold it together just a little longer, Kira said, her voice a mix of determination and exhaustion. Just a little longer. The tension in the cargo hold was palpable, a living entity that wrapped itself around each of them like a shroud. But beneath it all, there was a sense of camaraderie, a shared defiance that refused to be extinguished. The Veldor ships hovered on the edge of their sensors, their hesitation a testament to the crew's ingenuity. They'd bought themselves a moment of respite, a brief reprieve in the midst of chaos. But in space, moments were fleeting and the fight was far from over. Trenton, Rourke said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. If we pull this off, drinks are on me. Trenton chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. I'll hold you to that, Captain. But let's make sure we live long enough to collect. The crew prepared for the next phase of their desperate stand, knowing full well that the odds were stacked against them. But if there was one thing the universe had taught them, it was that humans had a knack for beating the odds. Even when the cards were down, the stakes impossibly high, and all seemed lost, there was always that flicker of hope. The kind that refused to die, no matter how hard the universe tried to snuff it out. As the Solstice continued its tenuous dance with destiny, Trenton couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his crew. They were battered and bruised, outnumbered and outgunned, but they were still fighting. And sometimes that was enough. As the engines hummed their dangerous tune and the Veldor ships wavered, Trenton allowed himself a moment of rare optimism. They were far from being out of the woods, but they'd lit a path through the darkness. With any luck, that path would lead them to victory, or, at the very least, to another day of defying the odds, because in the end, that was what it meant to be human. Trenton leaned against the console, squinting at the chaotic mess of symbols and numbers dancing across the screen like a cosmic rave gone wrong. The Solstice's bridge smelled like burnt circuitry and desperation, which was an improvement over the ode to survival in the cargo hold. He frowned, the kind of frown that said, I'm either about to have a revelation or a stroke. Hey, he called over to Kira, who was busy trying to keep their ship from turning into a cloud of space confetti. You ever feel like the AI running on a script written by a half-baked intern? Kira glanced up, eyebrows raised. You mean like it's got a death wish, something like that, Trenton replied, rubbing his chin. But more like it's all programmed to be predictable, you know. Like it's following a script to the letter without any room for improvisation. Drax, sitting awkwardly with his knees up to his chin, chimed in. Improvisation. You mean like when the plan goes to hell and we just wing it? Exactly, Trenton said, snapping his fingers. Think about it. Humans, we're messy. We break rules. Ain't that why we're still here, annoying the hell out of the universe, Rourke, standing with his usual bemused detachment, gave an approving nod. Being unpredictable is our best weapon. The Veldor run on precision calculation. They're like a bad marriage between a computer and a drill sergeant. Agatha, perched on a nearby crate like a skeptical gargoyle, snorted. So, you're saying we need to out-crazy the AI? Sounds about right. Trenton tapped a few keys, his eyes narrowing. If we can figure out a way to exploit that rigidity, maybe we can force Sol into a loop it can't get out of. Basically, throw a human wrench into its digital gears. Drax asked, his grin more hopeful than his words. Exactly, Trenton said, his fingers dancing over the vintage computer system like a pianist at a dive bar. I just need to find the right piece of code to mess with. Something that'll make Sol think twice about its next move. Great, Kira said, her fingers never pausing on her own console. But how do you plan on finding that one glitch in this digital haystack? Dumb luck, obviously, Trenton replied with a crooked grin. But we're overdue for some of that, don't you think? Agatha sighed, rolling her eyes. Luck. The same thing that got us in this mess. Let's hope your luck is better than our self-preservation instincts. For a few tense moments, Trenton worked in silence, the hum of the overclocked engines a constant reminder of their precarious situation. He could feel the weight of the crew's hope resting on his shoulders, a burden heavier than the ship's malfunctioning gravity plating. Then, like a flash of insight brought on by sheer frustration, he saw it. A line of code hidden in the mess of subroutines and algorithms. It was a flaw, a tiny crack in the otherwise seamless logic chain that Sol and by extension the Veldor relied on. Gotcha, he muttered under his breath, feeling a glimmer of triumph amidst the chaos. What is it? Rourke asked, his eyes keen and focused. Sol's got a little vulnerability, Trenton announced, unable to keep the excitement out of his voice. Something even the Veldor didn't catch. If we can exploit it, we might just be able to make Sol second-guess itself. And how do you propose we do that? Agatha asked, leaning forward with interest. By doing what humans do best, Trenton replied with a sly smile. By breaking things in ways no one thought possible. Drax chuckled, shaking his head. If there's one thing we're good at, it's breaking things. Precisely, Trenton agreed. I can introduce a paradox into Sol's decision matrix, something it can't compute. It'll be like asking it to divide by zero. Kira's eyes lit up with recognition. You mean a classic does this sentence make sense kind of paradox? Exactly, Trenton nodded. If Sol gets stuck in a logic loop, it can't make decisions. The Veldor won't know what hit them. Sounds risky, Agatha pointed out, ever the voice of caution. Risky's our middle name, Trenton shot back. Besides, the way I see it, we've got nothing left to lose. Rourke stepped forward, laying a hand on Trenton's shoulder. Do it. We've come this far on guts and duct tape. No point stopping now. With the captain's blessing, Trenton got to work. He felt like a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a hat, except the rabbit was an AI-killing paradox, and the hat was a glorified tin can hurtling through space. The crew watched in silence, each of them holding their breath as Trenton navigated the convoluted pathways of Sol's programming. The ship groaned again, a reminder that time was not on their side. Almost there, Trenton muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he made the final adjustments. And, done, he hit the enter key with a flourish, like a conductor signaling the climax of a symphony. The console beeped, a sound that was both triumphant and terrifying. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The universe held its breath, waiting to see if their gamble would pay off. Then slowly the lights on the console began to flicker, erratic and confused. It was a good sign, like watching a drunk AI try to walk a straight line. It's working, Kira whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. The solstice lurched again, but this time it felt different. Less like a death rattle and more like a triumphant roar. The Veldor ships on the sensors hesitated, their sleek forms wavering as if unsure of their next move. We've done it. Drax shouted, pumping his fist in the air. Don't celebrate just yet, Rourke cautioned, though his eyes shone with approval. We're not out of the woods. We need to use this time to get the hell out of Dodge. Right? Trenton agreed, adrenaline giving way to a second wind. Let's see if we can maneuver around them while they're busy scratching their heads. Kira nodded, her fingers flying over the console as she plotted a course that would take them away from the Veldor ships and hopefully into open space where they could regroup. Agatha stood, a rare smile breaking through her stoic mask. I'll start prepping the engines. Let's show these bastards what a fluke of nature can do. The crew moved as one, a well-oiled machine honed by necessity and desperation. Each of them played their part, knowing that their lives depended on their ability to capitalize on this brief advantage. As they worked, Trenton couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Not just in their victory over the AI and the Veldor, but in the resilience and ingenuity of his comrades. They'd been handed a deck stacked with jokers, and yet they'd managed to pull off a straight flush. The Solstice began to accelerate, engines roaring with renewed purpose. The Veldor ships remained paralyzed, caught in the throes of an existential crisis they hadn't seen coming. We're gaining distance, Kira reported, her voice filled with cautious optimism. Rourke nodded, a rare grin splitting his usually composed facade. Good, let's keep it that way. We've got a rendezvous with freedom. Drax laughed, the sound bright and infectious. Freedom, eh? And here I thought we were just aimlessly drifting until we died of boredom. Boredom's a luxury, Agatha said, her tone dry as a desert. Personally, I prefer our current brand of chaos. The Solstice surged forward, leaving the Veldor and their malfunctioning AI in the dust. It was a victory, however temporary, and a testament to the crew's tenacity and wit. As they sailed through the stars, Trenton allowed himself a moment to savor the sweet taste of success. It was fleeting, sure, but in the unforgiving expanse of space, even fleeting victories were worth celebrating. And so they pressed on, riding the high of their triumph and the promise of another day. The future was uncertain, the odds still against them, but for now, they had hope. That, and the knowledge that no matter how advanced the enemy, there was always a human solution. We've got some distance on them, Captain Kira said, her fingers still dancing over the console. But they'll sort themselves out eventually. They always do, Rourke replied, his eyes distant as he gazed out into the vastness of space. But we'll be ready for them. Trenton leaned back, feeling the tension in his muscles slowly unwinding. Their work was far from over, but they'd bought themselves a precious commodity: time. Speaking of ready, Agatha said, her voice cutting through the momentary lull. What's the plan, Captain? We can't drift forever. Rourke glanced over his shoulder, meeting the eyes of each crew member in turn. We find a way to fix the Solstice, regroup, and keep moving. The Veldor aren't the type to give up easily, or ever, Drax added, stretching his legs with a groan. But hey, brings a little spice to the whole survival thing. As the crew settled back into the rhythm of their duties, Trenton's mind continued to turn over the events of the last few hours. There was still so much to process, so many questions left unanswered. But they'd done the impossible today, and that was enough to keep him going. As the universe spun on around them, indifferent and unyielding, the crew of the Solstice held their course, guided by nothing more than a compass made of human spirit and ingenuity. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see them through. The Solstice groaned like it was auditioning for a role as a haunted house in a B-movie. Trenton wiped sweat from his brow, eyeing Kira as she tapped viciously at her console. The bridge was a mess of flickering lights, and the kind of organized chaos that only happens when everything's teetering on the edge of disaster. All right, Kira, Trenton said, casting a glance at the comms array. Time to put our plan into action and show the universe why humans shouldn't be underestimated. Kira, eyes glued to the vintage computer system, shot a sardonic smile over her shoulder. Because we're too stupid to quit, exactly, and too stubborn to die. Trenton's fingers danced across his console, entering codes with the kind of reckless abandon usually reserved for high-stakes gamblers. Because really, what was life if not one big, cosmic roulette wheel? Captain Rourke stood nearby, surveying the scene with the calm detachment of a man fully aware that the situation was out of his hands. Make it count, Trenton. I prefer not to add explosion to today's list of woes. No promises, Cap, Trenton replied. But if we're going out, we'll do it in a blaze of glory. Agatha moved beside Kira, folding her arms. Our lives in the hands of a man who brags about his talent for destruction. What could possibly go wrong? Everything and nothing. Drax chimed in, trying to find a comfortable position in his seat and failing miserably. But hey, it's not like we're doing anything else. The ship lurched, and everyone grabbed onto anything that wasn't bolted down. The Solstice was a rickety old bird, but she had a knack for defying expectations. Much like the crew, really. A motley bunch tossed together by chance and held together by, what else, duct tape. All right, Kira, Trenton said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline-fueled chaos. Let's introduce Sol to its digital existential crisis. Kira nodded, her fingers a blur as she executed the sequence. The plan was simple. Shove a paradox so nonsensical into Sol's circuitry that it'd be too busy contemplating its own digital navel to bother with anything else. Here goes nothing, Kira murmured, hitting the final command with a flourish. The lights on the console flared, then dimmed, like a computer trying really hard to pretend it was a disco ball. Think it worked? Drax asked, craning his neck to see the monitors. Either that or we've just given it a personality crisis, Agatha replied. Which, honestly, isn't the worst thing. The ship shuddered again, but this time there was a sense of optimism in the air, or maybe it was just the lack of immediate fiery death. The Veldor ships on the sensors hesitated, caught up in the fallout of Sol's mental breakdown. Look at that, Trenton said, a touch of disbelief in his voice. We've got them second-guessing. Not just second-guessing, Kira added, eyes flicking over the digital readouts. They're paralyzed. Sol's trying to figure out if it's a real boy or just a collection of ones and zeros. Veldor didn't account for the ultimate human tactic, Rourke said, his voice laced with amusement. Messing things up beyond repair. Drax let out a bark of laughter. And they thought they could learn survival skills from us. Joke's on them. We've got a window, Trenton said, refocusing. Let's use it before they shake off their confusion. Kira's hands moved like lightning, plotting a course through the stars that promised freedom, or at least the closest approximation available to them. Coordinates set. We'll be out of here in no time. The engines roared, echoing the crew's determination. The Solstice surged forward, leaving the Veldor floundering in their own precision and calculation. Feels good to get one over on them, doesn't it? Agatha said, a rare glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Every once in a while, the universe throws you a bone, Trenton replied, watching the distance between them and the Veldor grow on the display. The Solstice's bridge, usually a cacophony of alarms and malfunctioning tech, was silent but for the hum of the engines. Each member of the crew exhaled in unison, the tension slipping away like smoke. We're clear, Kira announced, leaning back with a relieved sigh. For now, at least. Rourke grinned, the expression so out of place on his face it looked like he'd borrowed it from someone else. Good work, everyone. Let's see if we can keep it up. Nothing like a little insurmountable odds to get the blood pumping, huh? Drax said, stretching his arms above his head. I feel alive. Let's just aim for alive, Agatha suggested, her tone dry as ever. Excitement is overrated. Trenton watched the stars blur past, feeling a strange sense of peace. Maybe it was the knowledge that they'd managed to outsmart an advanced AI and its alien overlords, or maybe it was just relief that they hadn't been vaporized. Think Ziggy will take this news well? Kira asked, still focused on the console as if it held the answers to the universe. Ziggy? Trenton snorted. That man would sell his own mother for the right price. He'll probably make a fortune off our success somehow. I'd bet on it, Rourke agreed. He's too resourceful, or maybe just too unscrupulous, to miss a chance like this. As the Solstice coasted through the void, the crew settled back into their routine. There was work to be done, repairs to make, and plans to lay for the next inevitable crisis. But for the moment, they savored their hard-won victory. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "Hey, Trenton," Drax called, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Think you can rig something up to make Sol sing show tunes next time?" Trenton chuckled, considering the idea. "Give me time and access to a jukebox and anything is possible," Agatha snorted. "Now that's a weapon I'd pay to see." The Veldor would never know what hit them. The conversation flowed, each joke and jibe a reminder of their resilience. They might be a ragtag band of misfits with a questionable sense of self-preservation, but they were still flying, still fighting, and maybe that was enough. As the stars stretched on before them, the Solstice's crew embraced the uncertainty of their path. They might not know where they were headed, or what awaited them, but that was part of the adventure. The chaos, the unpredictability, it was woven into their very existence. "Here's to survival," Rourke said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to whatever comes next, to more duct tape and daring escapes," Trenton added, following suit. "And to whatever insanity we get dragged into next," Agatha finished, a wry smile tugging at her lips. The Solstice sailed on, a ship held together by determination and the sheer stubbornness of its crew. The stars beckoned, the universe unfurling in all its unforgiving glory. But for now they had each other, a ship that refused to quit, and the knowledge that whatever happened next, they'd face it together. And that was enough to make even the darkest corners of space feel a little brighter. So they pressed forward, a ragged band of survivors, laughing in the face of fate. Because in the end, that was the human way, messy, unpredictable, and infinitely resilient. "Let's keep moving," Rourke said, breaking the silence. "We've got a lot of space to cover." And with that, the Solstice carved its path through the stars, leaving behind a trail of triumph, laughter, and the faintest glimmer of hope. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see them through whatever lay ahead. The Solstice limped through space like a drunk on a bender, sure-footed but only just. The crew was busy patching up the latest round of damage with their usual cocktail of ingenuity and desperation. The hum of the engines was a lullaby to their frayed nerves, and the scent of burning circuits was now classified as a comfort smell, like grandma's cookies, but carcinogenic. Trenton stood in the middle of the bridge, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face like a permanent fixture. "Well, folks, consider us lucky bastards for dodging that bullet. More like a whole magazine," Kira quipped from her station. She was already elbow-deep in the guts of the vintage computer system, the console's lights blinking at her in what she liked to imagine was a semblance of gratitude. "Next time you want to give an AI an existential crisis, maybe consult me first." Trenton waved a dismissive hand. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, I thought you enjoyed playing God, only when it involves fewer death traps," she replied dryly. "Though I have to admit, there's a sick satisfaction in watching the Veldor scramble. Like watching cats try to swim. Swimming cats, huh?" Drax mused, trying once again to find a comfortable way to sit that wouldn't result in permanent spinal damage. "Pretty sure that's a war crime somewhere. Only if you get caught," Agatha chimed in, leaning against a bulkhead that looked like it had seen better centuries. She had the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much and was waiting to see more, just for kicks. "And isn't that what we're good at? Not getting caught. Relying on luck and duct tape is hardly a sound strategy," Rourke said, crossing his arms as he surveyed the bridge. His voice carried the weight of authority, but his eyes twinkled with a rogue's charisma. "But it seems to work for us, for now." The Solstice creaked ominously as if agreeing or disagreeing. It was hard to tell with these vintage models. Trenton's grin widened. "And who said old age doesn't bring wisdom or chronic instability?" Agatha muttered, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "But hey, whatever keeps us in one piece." "Speaking of instability," Kira said, her fingers still dancing over the keys, "I think Sol's coming out of its digital stupor. We might need another plan if it starts getting ideas again." Trenton cracked his knuckles. "Don't worry, I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve." "Why does that scare me more than the Veldor?" Drax groaned. "I swear if we start hearing elevator music in the air ducts, I'm jumping ship." "Good luck with that," Agatha said, smirking. Pretty sure the vacuum of space doesn't take reservations. Trenton chuckled, the kind of laugh that was contagious, even in the cold, uncaring expanse of space. You'd miss my charming company too much, admit it. Like a rash, Agatha replied, her lips twitching into a reluctant smile. They worked in tandem, a jigsaw puzzle of personalities that somehow fit together despite the glaring disparities. The bridge was filled with the chatter of repairs, the hum of machinery, and the occasional curse when something didn't go according to plan, which was often. "Anyone hear from Ziggy yet?" Rourke asked, breaking the comfortable rhythm of activity. "Not a peep," Kira said, squinting at one of the consoles as if daring it to malfunction. "He's probably busy selling our escapades as exclusive intel to the highest bidder. Wouldn't put it past him," Trenton agreed. "He's got enough grease on his palms to start a biodiesel factory. Ziggy's reliability is like one of those bad penny things," Drax said, scratching his head. "Keeps turning up, just slightly more annoying each time. Maybe this time he'll bring us a souvenir," Agatha suggested, her tone deadpan. "Like a fridge magnet that says, 'I survived the Veldor and all I got was this lousy neural implant.'" Rourke shook his head, amused despite himself. "Whatever Ziggy's up to, we'll deal with it when the time comes. For now, let's focus on getting Sol back on its feet." The AI was in a state of recovery, its circuits working overtime to piece together what remained of its shattered self-esteem. The Veldor, meanwhile, were likely licking their wounds and recalibrating their plans, or so the crew hoped. There was a sense of victory in the air, albeit a tentative one, like balancing on the edge of a knife. "Think they'll come after us again?" Drax asked, the question lingering like smoke. "Probably," Trenton said, "but we'll be ready for them, or as ready as any half-broken ship and its crew of misfits can be." "Optimism isn't your strong suit, is it?" Agatha said, raising an eyebrow. "Realism is overrated," Trenton replied. "Besides, we've got something they don't, an unshakable sense of self-preservation," Kira guessed. "Nah," Trenton said, shaking his head. "We've got each other, and more duct tape than they can possibly imagine." Agatha rolled her eyes, but her smile was genuine. "You're a sentimental idiot, Trenton, guilty as charged," he said with a mock bow. "But you love me for it." "You're a lovable idiot," Drax added, "but an idiot nonetheless." The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge and mingling with the hum of the ship. It was a moment of camaraderie that felt like it could last forever, even though they all knew better. The weeks passed like a blur, the crew settling back into their routines with the practiced ease of people who'd survived on the edge for far too long. Repairs were made, systems were checked, and the bridge slowly turned from a chaotic war zone back into something resembling normalcy, if one squinted and used their imagination. Kira was in her element, coaxing life back into the solstice with a mix of technical know-how and sheer force of will. Trenton was her willing accomplice, lending a hand where needed and providing a running commentary that ranged from mildly amusing to downright questionable. "Pass me the hydrospanner," Kira called, her voice muffled by the innards of a console. "Sure you don't want the sonic screwdriver?" Trenton quipped, handing over the tool. "Wrong universe, genius," she shot back, not missing a beat. "But points for creativity. Creativity is all we've got," Trenton said, leaning against the bulkhead. "That and a rapidly diminishing supply of caffeine. Never underestimate the power of caffeine," Drax advised from his perch. "It's the only thing keeping me from mutiny." "Mutiny requires effort," Agatha interjected, "and you're about as effective as a broken hyperdrive." "I resemble that remark," Drax replied with a grin. Rourke watched his crew with a mixture of pride and exasperation. They were an odd bunch, each with their own quirks and flaws, but they worked. And in a universe that seemed intent on tearing them apart, that was worth more than all the credits in the galaxy. "So, what's next?" Agatha asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Same as always," Rourke said. "Keep moving, keep fighting, and hope the universe doesn't decide to throw another curveball our way." "Not much of a plan," Kira said, closing the panel with a decisive snap. "Plans are for people who like structure," Trenton said. We've got chaos and we make it work. The Solstice flew on, carving a path through the stars with its ragtag crew at the helm. They were bruised, battered, but unbroken, and that was enough. Think we'll ever catch a break? Drax wondered aloud, gazing out at the endless expanse of space. Nope, Agatha said, crossing her arms. But we'll keep on trying. Here's to trying then, Trenton said, raising an imaginary glass once more. And to whatever's next, to survival, Rourke added, his voice steady and sure. And to duct tape, Kira finished, a mischievous glint in her eye. As laughter and good-natured ribbing filled the bridge, the Solstice sailed on. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they knew they'd face it together. Because in a universe that often felt cold and indifferent, they were a beacon of humanity's resilience, a small, stubborn flame refusing to be extinguished. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.